Welcome to my book playlist. I am Daisy, and in this video we are going to explore the chakras through the book titled The Chakras by C.W. Leadbeater. This book is in the public domain. Let's dive right into this. Preface to the first edition. When a man begins to develop his senses so that he may see a little more than everybody sees, a new and most fascinating world opens before him, and the chakras are among the first objects in that world to attract his attention. His fellow men present themselves under a fresh aspect. He perceives much with regard to them which was previously hidden from his eyes, and he is therefore able to understand, to appreciate, and, when necessary, to help them much better than he could before. Their thoughts and feelings are expressed clearly before his eyes in color and form. The stage of their development, the condition of their health become obvious facts instead of mere matters of inference. The brilliant coloring and the rapid and incessant movement of the chakras bring them immediately under his observation, and he naturally wants to know what they are and what they mean. It is the object of this book to provide an answer to those questions and to give to those who have not yet made any attempt to unfold their dormant faculties some idea of at least this one small section of what is seen by their more fortunate brethren. In order to clear away inevitable preliminary misconception, let it be definitely understood there is nothing fanciful or unnatural about the sight which enables some men to perceive more than others. It is simply an extension of faculties with which we are all familiar, and to acquire it is to make oneself sensitive to vibrations more rapid than those to which our physical senses are normally trained to respond. These faculties will come to everyone in due course of evolution, but some of us have taken special trouble to develop them now in advance of the rest, at the cost of many years of harder work than most people would care to undertake. I know that there are still many men in the world who are far behind the times as to deny the existence of such powers, just as there are still villagers who have never seen a railway train. I have neither time nor space to argue with such invincible ignorance. I can only refer inquirers to my book on clairvoyance, or to scores of books by other authors on the same subject. The whole case has been proved hundreds of times, and no one who is capable of weighing the value of evidence can any longer be in doubt. Much has been written about the chakras, but is chiefly in Sanskrit or in some of the Indian vernaculars. It is only quite recently that any account of them has appeared in English. I mentioned them myself in The Inner Life about 1910, and since then Sir John Woodruff's magnificent work, The Serpent Power, has been issued, and some of the other Indian books have been translated. The symbolical drawings of them which are used by the Indian yogis were reproduced in The Serpent Power, but so far as I am aware, the illustrations which I give in this book are the first attempt to represent them as they actually appear to those who can see them. Indeed, it is chiefly in order to put before the public this fine series of drawings by my friend the Reverend Edward Warner that I write this book, and I wish to express my deep indebtedness to him for all the time and trouble that he has devoted to them. I have also to thank my indefatigable collaborator, Professor Ernest Wood, for the collection and collation of all the valuable information as to the Indian views on our subject, which is contained in Chapter 5. Being much occupied with other work, it was my intention merely to collect and reprint as accompanying letterpress to the illustrations the various articles which I had long ago written on the subject. But as I looked over them, certain questions suggested themselves, and a little investigation put me in possession of additional facts, which I have duly incorporated. An interesting point is that both the vitality globule and the Kundalini ring was observed by Dr. Annie Besant and cataloged in Hypermeta Proto Elements as long ago as 1895, though we did not then follow them far enough to discover their relation to one another and the important part that they play in the economy of human life. 1927 CWL. Chapter 1. The Force Centers. The word chakra is Sanskrit and signifies a wheel. It is also used in various subsidiary, derivative, and symbolical senses, just as is its English equivalent. As we might speak of the wheel of fate, so does the Buddhist speak of the wheel of life and death. And he describes that first great sermon in which the Lord Buddha propounded his doctrine as the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, chakra being the Pali equivalent to the Sanskrit chakra, which Professor Rhys Davids poetically renders as to set rolling the royal chariot wheel of a universal empire of truth and righteousness. That is exactly the spirit of the meaning which the expression conveys to the Buddhist devotee, though the literal translation of the bare word is the turning of the wheel of the law. The special use of the word chakra with which we are at the moment concerned is its application to a series of wheel-like vortices which exist in the surface of the etheric double of man. Preliminary explanations. As this book may probably fall into the hands of some who are not familiar with theosophical terminology, it may be well to insert here a few words of preliminary explanation. In ordinary superficial conversation, a man sometimes mentions his soul, implying that the body through which he speaks is the real man, and that this thing called the soul is a possession or appanage of that body. A sort of captive balloon floating over him and in some vague sort of way attached to him. This is a loose, inaccurate, and misleading statement. The exact opposite is the truth. Man is a soul and owns a body, several bodies in fact, for besides the visible vehicle by means of which he transacts his business with his lower world, he has others which are not visible to ordinary sight, by means of which he deals with the emotional and mental worlds. With those, however, we are not for the moment concerned. In the course of the last century, enormous advances have been made in our knowledge of the minute details of the physical body. Students of medicine are now familiar with its bewildering complexities and have at least a general idea of the way in which its amazingly intricate machinery works. The etheric double. Naturally, however, they have had to confine their attention to that part of the body which is dense enough to be visible to the eye, and most of them are probably unaware of the existence of that type of matter, still physical though invisible, to which in theosophy we give the name of etheric. Footnote. Not to be confused with ether, which some consider to be the medium for electromagnetic waves. Individually, not to be confused with the use of the term in psychology. End of footnote. This invisible part of the physical body is of great importance to us, for it is the vehicle through which flow the streams of vitality which keep the body alive, and without it, as a bridge to convey undulations of thought and feeling from the astral to the visible denser physical matter, the ego, could make no use of the cells of his brain, it is clearly visible to the clairvoyant as a mass of faintly luminous violet-gray mist interpenetrating to the denser part of the body and extending very slightly beyond it. The life of the physical body is one of perpetual change, and in order that it shall live, it needs constantly to be supplied from three distinct sources. It must have food for its digestion, air for its breathing, and vitality in three forms for its absorption. This vitality is essentially a force, but when clothed with matter, it appears to us though it were a highly refined chemical element. It exists upon all planes, but our business for the moment is to consider its manifestation in the physical world. In order to understand that, we must know something of the constitution and arrangement of this etheric part of our bodies. I have written on this subject many years ago in various volumes, and Colonel A.E. Powell has recently gathered together all the information heretofore published and issued it in a convenient form in a book called The Etheric Double. The centers. The chakras or force centers are points of connection at which energy flows from one vehicle or body of a man to another. Anyone who possesses a slight degree of clairvoyance may easily see them in the etheric double, where they show themselves as saucer-like depressions or vortices in its surface. When quite undeveloped, they appear as small circles about 2 inches in diameter, glowing dully in the ordinary man. But when awakened and vivified, they are seen as blazing, coruscating whirlpools, much increased in size and resembling miniature suns. We sometimes speak of them as roughly corresponding to certain physical organs. In reality, they show themselves at the surface of the etheric double, which projects slightly beyond the outline of the dense body. If we imagine ourselves to be looking straight down into the bell of a flower of the convolvulus type, we shall get some idea of the general appearance of a chakra. The stalk of the flower and each springs from a point in the spine, so another view might show the spine as a central system, from which the flowers shoot forth at intervals, showing the opening of their bells at the surface of the etheric body. The 7 centers which we are at present concerned are indicated in the accompanying illustration, Figure 1. Table 1 gives their English and Sanskrit names. All these wheels are perpetually rotating, and into the hub or open mouth of each, a force from the higher world is always flowing, a manifestation of the life stream issuing from the second aspect of the solar logos, which we call the primary force. That force is 7-fold in its nature, and all its forms operate in each of these centers, although one of them in each case usually predominates over the others. Without this inrush of energy, the physical body could not exist. Therefore, the centers are in operation in everyone, although in the undeveloped person, they are usually in comparatively sluggish motion, just forming the necessary vortex for the force and no more. In a more evolved man, they may be glowing and pulsating with living light, so that an enormously greater amount of energy passes through them, with the result that there are additional faculties and possibilities open to the man. The form of the vortices. This divine energy which pours into each center from without sets up at right angles to itself, that is to say, in the surface of the etheric double. Secondary forces in undulatory circular motion, just as a bar magnet thrust into an induction coil produces a current of electricity which flows round the coil at right angles to the axis or direction of the magnet. The primary force itself, having entered the vortex, radiates from it again at right angles, but in straight lines, as though the center of the vortex were the hub of a wheel, and the radiations of the primary force its spokes. By means of these spokes, the force seems to bind the astral and etheric bodies together as though with grappling hooks. The number of these spokes differs in the different force centers and determines the number of waves or petals which each of them exhibits. Because of this, these centers have often been poetically described in Oriental books as resembling flowers. Each of the secondary forces which sweep round the saucer-like depression has its own characteristic wavelength, just as has light of a certain color. But instead of moving in a straight line, as light does, it moves along relatively large undulations of various sizes, each of which is some multiple of the smaller wavelengths within it. The number of undulations is determined by the number of spokes in the wheel, and the secondary force waves itself under and over the radiating currents of the primary force, just as a basket work might be woven round the spokes of a carriage wheel. The wavelengths are infinitesimal, and probably thousands of them are included within one of the undulations. As the force rushes around in the vortex, these oscillations of different sizes, crossing one another in this basket-work fashion, produce the flower-like form to which I have referred. It is perhaps still more like the appearance of certain saucers or shallow vases of wavy iridescent glass, such as are made in Venice. All of these undulations or petals have that shimmering pavonine effect, like mother of pearl, yet each of them has usually in its own predominant color, as well be seen from our illustrations. This nacreous silvery aspect is likened in Sanskrit works to the gleam of moonlight on water. The illustrations. These illustrations of ours show the chakras as seen by clairvoyant sight in a fairly evolved and intelligent person, who has already brought them to some extent into working order. Of course, our colors are not sufficiently luminous, no earthly colors could be. But at least the drawings will give some idea of the actual appearance of these wheels of light. It will be understood from what already has been said that the centers vary in size and in brightness in different people, and that even in the same person, some of them may be much more developed than the rest. They are drawn about life-size except for the Sahasrara or crown chakra, which we have found it necessary to magnify in order to show its amazing wealth of detail. In the case of a man who excels greatly in the qualities which express themselves through a certain center, that center will be not only much enlarged, but also especially radiant, throwing out brilliant golden rays. An example of that may be seen in Madame Blavatsky's precipitation of the aura of Mr. Staten Moses, which is now kept in a cabinet in the archives of the Society of IDR. It is reproduced, though very imperfectly, on page 364 of Volume 1 of Colonel Olcott's old diary leaves. These chakras naturally divide into three groups: the lower, the middle, and the higher. They might be called respectively the physiological, the personal, and the spiritual. The first and second chakras, having but few spokes or petals, are principally concerned with receiving into the body two forces which come into it at that physical level, one being the serpent fire from the earth and the other the vitality from the sun. The centers of the middle group, numbered 3, 4, and 5, are engaged with the forces which reach man through his personality, through the lower astral in the case of center 3, the higher astral in center 4, and from the lower mind in center 5. All these centers seem to feed certain ganglia in the body. Center 6 and 7 stand apart from the rest, being connected with the pituitary body and the pineal gland respectively, and coming into action only when a certain amount of spiritual development has taken place. I have heard it suggested that each of the different petals of these four centers represents a moral quality, and that the development of that quality brings the center into activity. For example, in the Dhyana Bindu Upanishad, the petals of the heart chakra are associated with devotion, laziness, anger, charity, and similar qualities. I have not yet met with any facts which definitely confirm this, and it is not easy to see exactly how it can be because the appearance is produced by certain readily recognizable forces, and the petals in any particular center are either active or not active according as these forces have or have not been aroused. And their unfoldment seems to have no more direct connection with morality than has the enlargement of the biceps. I have certainly met with persons in whom some of the centers were in full activity, though the moral advancement was by no means exceptionally high, whereas in other persons of high spirituality and the noblest possible morality, the centers were scarcely yet vitalized at all. So that there does not seem to be any necessary connection between the two developments. There are, however, certain facts observable which may be the basis of this rather curious idea. Although the likeness to petals is caused by the same forces flowing round and round the center, alternately over and under the various spokes, those spokes differ in character, because the inrushing force is subdued into its component parts or qualities, and therefore each spoke radiates a specialized influence of its own, even though the variations be slight. The secondary force, in passing each spoke, is to some extent modified by its influence, and therefore changes a little in its hue. Some of these shades of color may indicate a form of the force which is helpful to the growth of some moral quality, and when that quality is strengthened, its corresponding vibration will be more pronounced. Thus, the deepening or weakening of the tint may be taken to betoken the possession of more or less of that attribute. The root chakra. The first center, the basic, plate 1, at the base of the spine, has a primary force which radiates out in 4 spokes and therefore arranges its undulations so as to give the effect of its being divided into quadrants, alternately red and orange in hue, with hollows between them. This makes it seem as though marked with the sign of the cross, and for that reason the cross is often used to symbolize this center, and sometimes a flaming cross is taken to indicate the serpent fire which resides in it. When acting with any vigor, this chakra is fiery orange-red in color, corresponding closely with the type of vitality which is sent down to it from the splenic center. Indeed, it will be noticed that in the case of every one of the chakra, a similar correspondence with the color of its vitality may be seen. The spleen chakra, the second center, the splenic, plate 2, at the spleen is devoted to the specialization, subdivision, and dispersion of the vitality which comes to us from the sun. That vitality is poured out again from it in 6 horizontal streams, the 7th variety being drawn into the hub of the wheel. This center therefore has 6 petals or undulations, all of different colors, and is especially radiant, glowing, and sun-like. Each of the 6 divisions of the wheel shows predominantly the color of one of the forms of the vital force: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. The navel chakra, the third center, the umbilical, plate 4, at the navel of the solar plexus, receives a primary force with 10 radiations, so it vibrates in such a manner as to divide itself into 10 undulations or petals. It is very closely associated with feelings and emotions of various kinds. Its predominant color is a curious blending of several shades of red, though there is also a great deal of green in it. The divisions are alternately chiefly red and chiefly green. The heart chakra, the 4th center, the cardiac, plate 5, at the heart is of a glowing golden color, and each of its quadrants is divided into 3 parts, which gives it 12 undulations. because its primary force makes for it 12 spokes. The throat chakra, the fifth center, the laryngeal, plate 7, at the throat has 16 spokes and therefore 16 apparent divisions. There is a good deal of blue in it, but its general effect is silvery and gleaming, with a kind of suggestion as of moonlight upon rippling water. Blue and green predominate alternately in its sections. The brow chakra, the sixth center, the frontal, plate 9, between the eyebrows, has the appearance of being divided into halves, one chiefly rose-colored, though with a great deal of yellow about it, and the other predominantly a kind of purplish blue, again closely agreeing with the colors of the special type of vitality that it vivifies. Perhaps it is for this reason that this center is mentioned in Indian books as having only 2 petals, though if we are to count undulations of the same character as those of the previous centers, we shall find that each half is subdivided into 48 of these, making 96 in all, because its primary force has that number of radiations. This sudden leap from 16 to 96 spokes, and again, the even more startling variation from 96 to 972 between this and the next chakra, show us that we are now dealing with centers of an altogether different order from those which we have hitherto been considering. We do not yet know all the factors which determine the number of spokes in a chakra, but it is already evident that they represent shades of variation in the primary force. Before we can say much more than this, hundreds of observations and comparisons must be made, repeated, and verified over and over again. But meantime, this much is clear, that while the need of the personality can be satisfied by a limited number of types of force, when we come to the higher and more permanent principles of man, we encounter a complexity, a multiplicity, which demands for its expression a vastly greater selection of modification of the energy. The crown chakra, the 7th center, the coronal at the top of the head, is, when stirred into full activity, the most respondent of all, full of indescribable chromatic effects and vibrating with almost inconceivable rapidity. It seems to contain all sorts of prismatic hues, but is on the whole predominantly violet. It is described in Indian books as 1,000-petaled, and really this is not very far from the truth, the number of the radiations of its primary force in the outer circle being 960. Every line of this will be seen faithfully reproduced in our frontispiece, though it is hardly possible to give the effect of the separate petals. In addition to this, it has a feature which is possessed by none of the other chakras, a sort of subsidiary central whirlpool of gleaming white flushed with gold in its heart, a minor activity which has 12 undulations of its own. This chakra is usually the last to be awakened. In the beginning, it is the same size as the others, but as the man progressed on the path of spiritual advancement, it increases steadily until it covers almost the whole top of the head. Another peculiarity attends its development. It is at first a depression in the etheric body, as are all the others, because through it, as through them, the divine force flows in from without. But when the man realizes his position as a king of the divine light, dispensing largesse to all around him, this chakra reverses itself, turning as it were inside out. It is no longer a channel of reception, but of radiation, no longer a depression, but a prominence standing out from the head as a dome, a veritable crown of glory. In Oriental pictures and statues of the deities or great men, this prominence is often shown. In Figure 2, it appears on the head of a statue of the Lord Buddha at Borobudur in Java. This is the conventional method of representing it, and in this form it is to be found upon the heads of thousands of images of the Lord Buddha all over the Eastern world. In many cases, it will be seen that the two tiers of the Sahasrara chakra are copied, the larger dome of the 960 petals first, and then the smaller dome of 12 rising out of it in turn. The head on the right is that of Brahma from the Hokido of Todaiji at Nara in Japan, dating from AD 749. And it will be seen that the statue is wearing a headdress fashioned to represent this chakra, though in a form somewhat different from the last, showing the coronet of flames shooting up from it. It appears also in the Christian symbology, in the crowns worn by the 24 elders who are forever casting them down before the throne of God. In the highly developed man, this coronal chakra pours out splendor and glory, which makes for him a veritable crown. And the meaning of that passage of scripture is that all that he has gained, all the magnificent karma that he makes, all the wondrous spiritual forces that he generates, all that he casts perpetually at the feet of the Logos to be used in his work. So, over and over again, can he continue to cast down his golden crown because it continually reforms as the force wells up from within him. Other accounts of the centers. These 7 centers are frequently described in Sanskrit literature in some of the minor Upanishads, in the Puranas and the Tantric works. They are used today by many Indian yogis. A friend acquainted with the inner life of India assures me that he knows of one school in that country which makes free use of the chakras, a school which numbers as its pupils about 16,000 people scattered over a large area. There is much interesting information available on the subject from Hindu sources, which we will try to summarize with comments in a later chapter. It appears also that certain European mystics were acquainted with the chakras. Evidence of this occurs in a book entitled Theosophia Practica by the well-known German mystic Johann Georg Gichtel, a pupil of Jacob Boehme, who probably belonged to the secret society of the Rosicrucians. It is from this work of Gichtel's that our Plate 3 is reproduced by the kind permission of the publishers. This book was originally issued in the year 1696, though in the edition of 1736 it is said that the pictures, of which the volume is mainly a description, were printed only some 10 years after the death of the author, which took place in 1710. The book must be distinguished from a collection of Gichtel's correspondence put forth under the same title, Theosophia Practica. The present volume is not in the form of letters, but constitutes of 6 chapters dealing with the subject of that mystic regeneration, which was such an important tenet of the Rosicrucians. The illustration which we give here has been photographed from the French translation of the Theosophia Practica published in 1897 in the Bibliothèque Rosicrucienne No. 4 by the Bibliothèque Charconac, Paris. Gichtel, who was born in 1638 at Ratisbon in Bavaria, studied theology and law and practiced as an advocate, but afterwards, becoming conscious of a spiritual world within, gave up all worldly interest and became the founder of a mystical Christian movement. Being opposed to the ignorant orthodoxy of his time, he drew down upon himself the hatred of those whom he had attacked, and about 1670 he was consequently banished and his property confiscated. He finally found refuge in Holland, where he lived for the remaining 40 years of his life. He evidently considered the figures printed in his Theosophica Practica as being of a secret nature. Apparently they were kept within the small circle of his disciples for quite a number of years. They were, he says, the result of an inner illumination, presumably of what in our modern times we should call clairvoyant faculties. On the title page of his book, he says that it is a short exposition of the three principles of the three worlds in man, represented in clear pictures showing how and where they have their respective centers in the inner man. According to what the author has found in himself in divine contemplation and what he has felt, tasted, and perceived. Like most mystics of his day, however, XOXO lacks the exactitude which should characterize true occultism and mysticism. In his description of the figures, he allows himself lengthy, though oftentimes quite interesting, digressions on the difficulties and problems of the spiritual life. As an exposition of his illustrations, however, his book is not a success. Perhaps he did not dare to say too much, or he may have wished to induce his readers to learn to see for themselves that of which he was writing. It seems likely that by the truly spiritual life which he led, he had developed sufficient clairvoyance to see these chakras, but that he was unaware of their true character and use, so that in his attempts to explain their meaning, he attached to them the current symbolism of the mystic school to which he belonged. He is here dealing, as will be seen, with the natural earthly man in a state of darkness, so he has perhaps some excuse for being a little pessimistic about his chakras. He lets the first and second pass without comment, possibly knowing that they are chiefly concerned with physiological processes, but labels the solar plexus as the home of anger, as indeed it is. He sees the heart center as filled with self-love, the throat with envy and avarice, and the higher centers of the head radiate nothing better than pride. He also assigns planets to the chakras, giving the moon to the basic Mercury, the splenic, Venus to the umbilical, the sun to the heart, though it will be noted that a snake is coiled around it, Mars to the laryngeal, Jupiter to the frontal, and Saturn to the coronal. He informs us further that fire resides in the heart, water in the liver, earth in the lungs, and air in the bladder. It is noteworthy that he draws a spiral starting from the snake round the heart and passing through all the centers in turn. But there seems to be very definite reason for the order in which this line touches them. The symbolism of the running dog is not explained, so we are left at liberty to interpret it as we will. The author gives us later an illustration of the man regenerated by the Christ, who has entirely crushed the serpent, but has replaced the sun by the Sacred Heart, dripping gore most gruesomely. The interest of the picture to us, however, is not in the author's interpretations, but in the fact that it shows beyond the possibility of mistake that at least some of the mystics of the 17th century knew of the existence and position of the 7 centers in the human body. Further evidence of early knowledge about these 4 centers exists in the rituals of Freemasonry, the salient points of which come down to us from time immemorial. The monuments show that these points were known and practiced in ancient Egypt, and they have been handed down faithfully to the present day. Masons find them among their secrets, and by utilizing them actually stimulate certain of these centers for the occasion and the purpose of their work, though they generally know little or nothing of what is happening beyond the range of normal sight. Obviously, explanations are impossible here, but I have mentioned as much of the matter as is permissible in The Hidden Life in Freemasonry. End of Chapter 1. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this with your friends, and head over to the next video where we're going to find out about the primary or life forces.